I'm your host, Bill Borton. Stress. It's part of all of our daily lives. For baby boomers, stress can take the form of work, kids in college, aging parents. We all deal with stress in different ways, some healthy, some not so healthy. Alcohol, drugs, food, so many things that people do to and for themselves to manage stress. My guest this week is Harriet Stein. Harriet is a registered nurse who's been presenting on the subject of mindfulness for quite a number of years now. Her passion is helping individuals take the steps necessary towards a healthier and more fulfilling life. The practice of mindfulness, which will enhance both your personal and professional lives, is something near and dear to her. Harriet, thanks for coming on my show.
Thank you so very much for inviting me, Bill.
So I've been hearing a lot about mindfulness lately. What's up with that? What's going on?
Yeah, it's become quite popular because the more stressed out the people are becoming, I think they realize that something has to be done. It is now, stress is attributed with being the #1 killer of people in the world now, as it affects heart disease, people with autoimmune diseases, which affects over 15 million people in the United States. As you said, people, they can't sleep, they can't concentrate. I find that people are just becoming more and more exhausted.
These smartphones don't help much either. People are addicted to them, and they're plugged in all the time. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, there's not a whole lot of good news when you get plugged into social media. Mm-hmm. So tell me about mindfulness. What is mindfulness?
Yeah, so I always take it for granted that everybody knows it just because it's been in the media so much. But mindfulness is very simple. It is all about just paying attention. So it is paying attention on purpose, moment by moment, to the present moment, because this is really the only moment that exists. So it's paying attention to your mood, it's paying attention to your body sensations, and it's a practice of non-judgment. So when you notice things, you're not judging them like, oh, that's good, or oh, I don't like that. You're just noticing it without judgment, and it's a practice of compassion.
Not easy to do.
It's very easy once you start practicing it.
Most of us look to the past to imagine the future and don't bother with that present moment sort of thing.
Exactly. And I think to myself of people who, we grew up without microwaves. We grew up with ovens, and nobody ever stood in front of their oven, yelling at it that it's taken 45 minutes to cook, food for us to eat. But now we stand in front of microwave ovens, and if something is even 2 minutes, we're like, why is it taking so long? Mm-hmm. And that's the level of impatience that unfortunately is now affecting people.
So how is mindfulness, or the practice of mindfulness, beginning to take hold?
Mm-hmm. Well, people nowadays are practicing it much more. And I'll give you an example in that I was teaching a program last week in New York City, and one of the people in the audience said that they were at their child's soccer game, and they were talking to somebody, and they were looking at their phone, and their daughter, who was a teenager, came off the field during the soccer game, up into the stands, and removed the smartphone from their parents' hands.
Oh my.
And I thought, how wonderful is that?
A little bit of a role reversal.
I know, and I loved that, because you know what? Here's the thing. If you are looking at your phone, and you are at your child's event, or if you're at a meeting with somebody, you are not paying attention to them. So it's actually more honest and more authentic to not be there. Because if you're going to show up and want to be present with somebody, whether it is at a meeting or whether it's at a meal or going to somebody's home or going to your child's school event, then you really don't want to be looking at that phone.
So give me an example, if you can, briefly, of a technique or a way of being in the present moment that people can think about or actually even put into place.
So it's very easy. Even a very simple 30-second practice is just bringing yourself to the present moment and just noticing where your body is making contact, even with what you're sitting on. So noticing the weight of your body, where it's making contact with the chair. If you're standing, noticing the weight of your body on your feet. And whenever you notice that your mind is thinking about something else, this is very common, right? We always have thoughts. It's bringing our attention right back to the sensations in your body.
So this reminds me of meditation. So it's the same, but not the same.
Well, one of the practices, when I teach programs, when I teach mindfulness, I teach the formal practice and the informal practice. So the formal practice of mindfulness is sitting meditation, eating meditation, or walking meditation. The informal practice is how we live our lives.
So I know with meditation, and I'm guessing with mindfulness, you were saying to be aware of what your body's in contact with and the like. All this is designed to keep you from remembering the past, imagining the future, and again, being just aware of now.
Exactly. I once posted something about Google or LinkedIn or Alexa will never notify you of the look of disappointment on your child's face, right? So it's very important to be able to pay attention to what is going on both around you and within you.
So when you're starting to stress over something and your blood pressure's going up and your mind is swirling around with all sorts of irrational thoughts, what's the easiest or the best way to kind of halt that and bring yourself back to the present moment?
Once you once you're aware of it, so it all comes down to the awareness. So that if you're having a conversation with somebody and you notice that your mind is drifting off, like you said, to something to the past, a past that no matter how hard you try, you can never change, or if you're worrying about something that's going to be happening in the future, a snowstorm might be coming or a snowstorm might not be coming. You just literally bring yourself back to the present moment and say, you know what, this is the only moment that actually exists, is right now. And then just really compassionately letting life unfold moment by moment.
And when we think about it, right now, we're okay.
Exactly. Right now, we're okay.
So we may not be in the next moment, but right now we are.
Right. And we'll take care of the next moment when we get there.
That sounds great. We're going to take a break now for a word from our sponsors. We'll be back in a moment with more Live Better Longer. Welcome back to Live Better Longer. I'm your host, Bill Borton, here with Harriet Stein. Harriet, for all of those stressed out baby boomers that are watching, what can you tell them about how they can put a practice of mindfulness into play right now?
Well, the first thing I would ask them to consider why they want to do this, right? So, a musician would never go on stage without first tuning their instrument. And a great chef, before they were ever going to make you a meal, they would make sure their knives were sharp. So what I would encourage people is before you get up and start your day, to just spend 10 minutes at least in the morning just sitting, just having a moment to just sit, and the practice of non-doing. It's sort of like tuning our own instrument
This
in
is
that way.
before you check your email and your Facebook page,
Oh,
right?
so before you check your email and everything else. Yes, that can all wait. One of the things that I actually do is I turn off all the notifications on my phone except for the ringer, because I find we are living in a world where we're so easily distracted. And the challenge is, when we talk about stress, like we were talking about a moment ago, stress is something that it's not that it happens to us. Stress is within us. So it's very important when you're having a practice, which is why I suggest starting first thing in the morning. When you have this practice and you're checking in during the day with yourself, so maybe you want to check in every hour and ask yourself, right, where am I? Am I in a past event in my mind thinking about something that no matter how hard I try, I can't undo or change it? Or am I worried about something in the future? And whether you do that once an hour or 1,000 times a day, that's the informal part of this practice, how we lead our lives. Because then when something happens, you're going to, in that moment, make that determination. Do you want to respond or do you want to react? Because that stress is not, the stress is not what's on the outside, it's on the inside. It's what's within our body. So it's kind of like we've created this prison. We have the keys to unlock the door.
Interesting. So now, I know you do most of your teaching or your training in the workplace. Why is that?
I find, so many of my colleagues, I was in the corporate world for 23 years and in hospitals for 12 years, and I found that people were becoming so much more stressed every year. So there was more of an inability to focus, And I found that mindfulness, by learning how to do this practice and then sharing it, it increases one's productivity and it decreases your stress. So it promotes collaboration, it promotes creativity, all things that people really want in the workplace.
So if you're an employer and you're concerned about turnover and morale and absenteeism, or people who are not being mindful at work because they're concerned about things outside, then teaching them mindfulness probably could help improve that.
Very much so. I saw a statistic recently that said that employee disengagement, right, costs between $450 to $550 billion a year for employers. So it is very much to the benefit of the employer to actually be able to support their employees in dealing with stress. So yes, this is exactly why I brought it into the workplace.
So now when you go in to work with an employer to help them help their employees, you do workshops or seminars? How does that work?
Exactly. So I was taught how to teach a program. I went for all my advanced training at Jefferson University in Philadelphia. So I spent years and many, many hours in learning how to teach this practice. So that when I went when I had a colleague, actually, a senior director at a busy Fortune 100 company, say, teach me this practice. I was like, well, it's 8 weeks long and it's 2.5 hours a week. That's the program I was taught how to teach. And she said, no, teach it to me right now. And that's when I realized you really have to be there for what the person needs, what the client needs. So I taught her a very brief 10-minute sitting meditation. And the next day, she flew to LA and she texted me from the tarmac at LAX. And she said, this is the first time I never had a problem flying. And I didn't realize she was so afraid of flying. And she, globally, she was always having to fly around for work. And she said her family all thought she was on drugs. And she was like, no, it's actually just using the mindfulness and staying in the moment. Because when you're on a plane and you have a little bit of turbulence, you're either going to go back in your mind to a past event where you're like, oh, I saw that in the news and this could happen and that could happen, or you're worrying, what if there's a problem with the plane? And so when you get out of that past future thinking and come into the present moment, you're like, oh, okay, I'm fine right now. And the plane is fine right now. So now she has no problem flying and she flies around the world. But that actually took 10 minutes for me to teach her. So that's why when I go into companies, whether I can spend an hour or 2 hours doing a workshop, or I can spend a full day doing a workshop, it's really how much time that they have that they're really willing to dedicate to supporting their employees, I find.
And so when you are with employees in a group setting in a company, it's very interactive, I assume.
Extremely. I always tell people this is not a lecture. No two of my programs are the same. So I want it to be a conversation. And like I said, I want them to experience both the formal practice, right, the sitting practice. Maybe we'll do a little of the eating meditation. Maybe if we have time, we also do the walking meditation. And the informal practice. How can they immediately bring this into their day-to-day basis, even whether it's in the workplace or at home?
So can you do this with a small group of people in like a lunchroom, or can you do it with a full auditorium full of people?
I've done it with both. I've done it for global leaders and as a keynote, or 20 minutes with 350 leaders from around the world at a company. And I've done it in conference rooms with 20 people. My most challenging time was when, remember, I was taught how to teach a program that's 8 weeks long. And one of the companies said, could you be out on the fitness trail teaching people about mindfulness? Which meant I had less than 2 minutes with people as they were walking by me along a fitness trail outside. And I realized then that, if you know what you're doing, you could actually teach somebody this practice in 2 minutes.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, we're going to take another break from a word from our sponsor. This is Bill Borton. We'll be back with more Live Better Longer. Welcome back to Live Better Longer. I'm your host, Bill Borton, here with Harriet Stein. So Harriet, how did you go from being a registered nurse to a mindfulness teacher?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to being in the corporate world. I was sitting in my office one day, and because people knew I was a nurse, I had a knock at the door, and they said that one of my colleagues was laying on the floor of her office in the dark. And I went to go and see what had happened, make sure she hadn't passed out or anything. And she had had a migraine, and she was very stressed out about something. And I realized I could not sit by watching my colleagues getting sick like this and not be able to offer them some type of support. And I started over lunchtime with a half-hour mindfulness meditation class with just 2 people in the conference room. And the following week, there weren't enough chairs in the conference room. And that's when I realized I knew that people would take to this practice in the workplace.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you started almost out of necessity, understanding that bringing mindfulness into the workplace was something that could really help. Now, your employer, did they assist you, or did they promote that within the organization?
Yeah, they were actually very supportive. Initially, I was told, feel free to teach the program, just don't tell anybody.
No, we don't want this woo-woo stuff getting around, right?
Right. And it's funny because I always tell people, if you notice right now, there's no candles, there's no special mindfulness clothes. There's no woo-woo anymore now that there's over 3 decades of research and over 2,500 scientific papers talking about how this practice, something as simple as non-doing, actually decreases your stress and increases your immune system to work better. So so it began very slowly at work, and more people became interested. And then eventually, where I was working, which was a Fortune 100 company, Global Health asked me to come up and do a program, and I did. And then more and more people started contacting me, and I ended up teaching over 5,000 employees. And that's when I realized, you know what, maybe I should actually take this leap of faith. I always encourage people to do and follow their intuition and their dreams. And I decided to leave and focus 100% on bringing this practice to the world.
Wow, so most people who start doing their own thing as a consultant or an entrepreneur do it because they've been downsized. But you physically evicted yourself from corporate America.
Well, I knew I had to do something. I thought it was really important. I watched my mother, who when she was 58, she didn't drink and she didn't smoke, and she ended up getting a type of cancer that was linked to her immune system, and which is very much affected by stress. And she ended up dying within 4 months, and she was only 58 years old.
Wow.
And I realized that I need, especially as a nurse, if there's something that I can do to decrease people's stress and increase their immune system, I want them to live better longer.
Live better longer. That's an interesting concept.
I think so.
So how did you make the transition? And what was it that actually was the activating event that caused you to make the choice to leave?
Yeah, well, I realized that people were not getting healthier. Every year, people were getting sicker. And companies were spending hundreds of billions of dollars on treating people. And they were treating the effect of the stress. And I thought, if there's a way that I can, help people proactively not have to go down the route of getting involved and becoming sick, because when you're sick, it not only affects the person, right? It affects the family, it affects their friends, it affects the workplace, it affects their coworkers. Everybody is affected when you become ill. And whether it's mental or physical, this has a really big impact in the workplace.
But you had to actually make the decision. You had to be mindful about leaving. And so what was there, did you tell me before there was a mentor that you had that helped you?
Right. So Jon Kabat-Zinn is the person who's attributed with bringing mindfulness to the Western Hemisphere. And I remember going up to him once at a conference, probably a decade ago, and telling him I'm a nurse and a clinical researcher, and I was a global trainer at the time. And I said, I want to do this full time. And I wanted him to give me a lead and tell me to call his friends somewhere. But instead, he said, if you want to make a big change in your life, you don't have to quit your job and you don't have to move. He said, just put your big toe in the water. Do one little thing. And that's when I decided to have that class over lunchtime at work with just 2 people. And as an homage to Jon and those wonderful words that changed my life, I named my company Big Toe in the Water.
Which is great. That's really terrific. And so if somebody wants to reach you to learn more about mindfulness, or for goodness sakes, maybe even to hire you to bring you into their company, bigtoeinthewater.com?
Yes, that's exactly how they can reach me. And, you know, in the words of John, he always says, we practice mindfulness as if our life depends on it because our life depends on it.
Wow, that's interesting. It
Yes.
really is. So where do you see all this going? I mean, again, everybody's stressed. Work is, you know, challenging for everyone. There's deadlines and
Right.
productivity and, you know, all the artificial intelligence and all these things that are creating a quickening of the pace and an increase in stress. Where do you see mindfulness going on the broader perspective or in the bigger picture?
Yeah. Well, I've been very excited. It's because I've been involved with this field for the last several decades now. It is expanding more and more. So now the military is teaching mindfulness. Initially, it was to people that were coming back after deploy to help with stress. And now they're teaching them mindfulness prior to being deployed. So when people like the military and big companies, IBM, you know, so many different places are teaching mindfulness, but now, thank goodness, it's now being brought into the schools. So now universities and colleges, I've also taught at, you know, local schools, so that now that I keep hearing more and more about universities and college students also being stressed out. And also, even in elementary schools, there's a school in Baltimore that when children get in trouble, they don't get set for detention where they're being asked to do something as a punishment. They're now sent to a class where they're being taught mindfulness meditation, where they just sit. And they've had incredibly excellent results by bringing mindfulness now into elementary schools.
It's amazing. So I guess when you think about it, mindfulness has been employed by professional athletes, golfers, Olympic athletes for years. And so all of this finally trickles down through the workplace to the population in general.
Yeah, the athletes are a great example. Pete Carroll talked about this a few years ago when he won the Super Bowl and talked about bringing mindfulness to his players and how he felt it helped them win the Super Bowl. And Phil Jackson actually wrote the book 11 Rings, where he talks about being the most winningest coach in history, and he attributes bringing mindfulness for himself and to his players as being a major contributing factor to him winning so many NBA rings.
So again, companies of all sizes could benefit from having you in?
Definitely, 100%. I've worked at companies with whether it's 50 people or whether it's 5,000 people or whether it's 130,000 employees. So no matter what the size is, because you're really coming in and working with small groups of people. And I find it's so much easier when you're working with people in person. Every once in a while I get requests to do this online, which I actually have done presentations online. But I think it's a totally different experience, and it's a much more I feel like it's a more productive conversation when you're there in person, working with a group of people, teaching them this practice, and once again, focusing on the formal practice and the informal practice, because this way you can find out specifically what challenges they're experiencing, and then we can address it through a mindfulness lens.
Well, this has been really, really interesting. And I would like to think that a number of our viewers, particularly people that may be executives or own businesses, would want to get in touch with you. So again, bigtoeinthewater.com, and your contact information is there on your website.
It is.
Along with a lot more information that people can find out about if they want to know more. I realize that this may be all new to some people, but hopefully it won't be too much longer before everybody's going to want to know about it.
Exactly. And if it's new to them, I would just suggest keeping an open mind and just putting their big toe in the water.
Wow, what a concept. Being a human being instead of a human doing.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Harriet. This has been terrific. I really appreciate your coming in.
Thank you, Bill.
And giving me a chance to live better longer through mindfulness.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is Bill Borton. Thank you for tuning in to Live Better Longer. We'll see you again next Tuesday at 11 on RVN TV. Thanks. Have a good day.